Okay, I'm going to work through, show you how to work through the heel flap, the heel turn, and picking up stitches for the gusset. So as you can see, I've knit about 1 inch of ribbing here and 1 inch of stockinette. Most legs on a sock you'll knit more than this, but this amount will be fine for our purposes. I cast on 64 stitches, and as you can see, this is the tail of the yarn from my cast on. So I have just completed an entire round of the sock. So the stitches that are showing here, this will be the, we'll call this for now the front of the sock, and this is the back, and we're going to knit the heel flap along the back stitches. These stitches will eventually become the instep, and these stitches will become the sole after the heel flap and gusset are knit. So what I like to do is keep track of the number of rows for my heel flap with one of these little row counters. And what I do when I knit a heel flap is generally knit the same number of rows as there are half the stitches in the sock. So for instance, this is a 64 stitch sock. I'm going to work my heel over 32 stitches, and I'm going to work 32 rows for my heel flap. That proportion seems to work out quite well. So if you have, you might have to fudge the numbers a little bit. If you had a 66 row or 66 count sock, stitch count on your sock, you might do 32 or 34 row heel flap, depending, because if you knit the heel flap the way I'm going to show you, you can't really do 33 stitches in it, or 33 rows. So anyway, I'm going to put this on the front needle, draw my needle out from the front, and I'm going to work back across these heel stitches that I've just knit. So I have the purl side showing, and I'm going to work my way across. First thing I'm going to do is slip the first stitch purlwise with the yarn in front. So I'm going to slip one and then knit one. Oops. Slip one again. Or I said knit one, I mean purl one. So I'm going to slip one, purl one across the entire row. Now at one time when I first learned to knit socks, and some patterns still instruct you to do it this way, I used to do the slipping of the stitches across the right side rows. I would purl this initial row, and then I would knit one, or slip one, knit one on the following row. But this, by doing the purl row first, you have less of a gap here between the instep and the sole. And also by doing the slipping of the purl stitches on your purl rows instead of on your right side rows or your knit rows, it's a little bit more economical as far as stitches go. You don't have to fiddle with your yarn or your stitches the same way. You just have your needles oriented the same way, and it's just that little bit quicker. So I've been doing it this way for a long time now, ever since I learned that tip. So we're getting close to the end here. And we're going to end with a purl. Now I'm going to take that, turn it over. So now I have my right side showing. You can see knit one, slip one across. So now I'm going to take my needle. I am going to slip one purlwise with my yarn in the back this time. You see how it's behind my needle. And then I'm just going to knit all the way across the row. Okay, so we're coming up to the last few stitches here. you will find that this one sits at a little bit of a different angle because it's been slipped. Just knit into it from the front the way you normally would knit a knit stitch. And you'll see it's a little bit elongated along the side. And that's going to give you a spot to pick up a stitch into. So when I get to the end of the row, I turn my row counter to 2, and I just keep track in rows by 2s. I just find that easier than having to do it every row. So when I come back to this end of the needle, I add 2 more rows. So then I'm going to start again. Slip the first stitch with the yarn in front, purlwise, purl the next stitch. Slip, purl, slip, purl, and so on. So I'm going to come back and show you how to turn the heel when I've knit 32 rows of my heel flap. Okay, so I've now knit a 32 row heel flap. You can see these columns of elongated stitches here. Those are the slipped stitches. And this has formed quite a tight fabric. So there's reinforcement for the heel, which is a place where a lot of people's socks wear out as they rub against the back of their shoe. So on the inside it looks like this. And you can see where these horizontal stitches are laying. Those are the slip stitches as they look from the inside. And along the edge here, you'll see what looks like a row of chain stitches. Those are the elongated slip stitches, and it's into these that we will pick up for the gusset. So now it's time to turn the heel. Once again, you will begin that process with the wrong side of the fabric facing you. So once again, I'm going to slip the first stitch as if to purl with the yarn in front. And in this case, because we have the 32 stitches, we're going to purl 16 stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 14, 15, 16. Now, the next 2 stitches we're going to purl 2 together, and then purl 1. Now we'll turn the work so that the right side is facing. We're going to slip the first stitch as if to purl with the yarn in back, and then in this case we're going to knit 3. 1, 2, 3. Now we're going to do a slip slip knit. I do mine like this. I slip my first stitch as if to knit, I slip my second stitch as if to purl, and then I knit those 2 stitches together through the back loop, and then knit 1. So what you can see is you have your center stitches right here. These are you purled to here, knit, purl 2 together, knit 1, and then you turned, you slipped this stitch, knit across, slip slip knit here, knit 1. Now there should be an equal number of stitches on either side of these gaps. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Now it works out best if you have an even number of stitches on either side of the center heel stitches to begin with. That means that when you finish, you will finish up with either a purl 2 together, purl 1, or a knit or an SSK knit 1, and it all finishes up nice and neatly. So now we've done the initial 2 rows of our heel flap. We're going to turn our work again. And once again, you're going to slip the first stitch with the yarn in front, slip it purlwise. Now you're going to purl across to within 1 stitch of the gap. So you can see over here a really obvious gap between this stitch and this stitch. So we're going to purl within 1 stitch of it. Then we're going to purl 2 together by purling the one stitch on the right side of the gap and the stitch on the left side of the gap. We're going to purl those together and purl 1. And again, we're going to turn our work. Slip the first stitch purlwise with the yarn in back, knit across to within 1 stitch of the gap. You can see the gap is very obvious there. And then you're going to slip knit these 2 stitches together. So again, I put my first one in, slip it as though I'm to knit, slip that one as though I'm to purl. Oops. Oh, splitting my stitches here. There we go. Then I'm going to knit those 2 together through the back and knit 1. Once again, you will see there's a gap between these stitches. And you can see the beginning, very beginning of your heel turn starting to form. Your yarn is starting to take, or your work is starting to take a turn. So again, turn your work to the wrong side. Slip the first stitch as if to purl, purl across to within 1 stitch of the gap. And as you'll notice, you're basically knitting or purling 1 stitch more each time because that center heel area is getting larger and the stitches on each side of your heel are being consumed. So they're within 1 stitch of the gap. Purl 2 together, purl 1. See, now there's only 2, 4, 6, 8 stitches there instead of 12. Again, slip 1. You can see that gap coming up. As if to knit, slip as if to purl, knit 2 together through the back loop, knit 1. And you can really see that heel starting to form now. So again, flip it over to the wrong side and just repeat the purl row and the knit row until all the stitches are consumed from each side. I'll work this up a little bit and come back when I'm close to finishing each end. So you can now see I'm approaching the end of the last purl row on the heel turn. So as you can see, there are 2 stitches remaining on the left side of the gap. So I'm going to work my final stitch here before the stitch before the gap. So again, I'm going to purl these 2 together and purl the last stitch. Now I'm going to turn my work and work the final knit row of the heel flap. Sorry, got that out of the frame there. So again, you can see there are 2 stitches remaining here on the side of the gap. So what you may notice is because you've been either purling two together or knitting, or slip slip knitting, SSKing two stitches together on either row, you have considerably less stitches on this side than you began with. So here we go. This is the final, worked within the last stitch before the gap, and I'll now work my final SSK. Whoops. Whoops. Yarn's a little bit splitty here. There we go. There we go. So we started with 32 stitches. You can see there's the heel. Yay, you've worked some magic. You've turned a right angle in your sock. And you have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18 stitches remaining. So just a little over half. Now, I'm working magic loops, so in order to work the gusset, I'm going to rearrange the stitches on my needle. The first thing I'm going to do is divide my heel stitches in half. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 9. I'm going to slip those along, and I'm going to bring the cord out at the halfway mark. So that I have half the heel stitches on my needle and the other half are resting on my cord. Now I'm going to do the same with the instep stitches. Now what we called the front of the sock we'll now call the instep. So I'm going to do the same thing. There's 32 stitches here, so I'm going to count over 16 and bring up the cord in the middle of the instep. 10, 12, 14, 16. Bring up the loop, slide these stitches onto, oops, stuck here, onto the needle thing. So what you're going to end up with is my sock is now going to look like this. And I'm going to have the, as I'm looking at it, the left side of the heel. I'm going to pick up along this gusset and work across the right side of the instep, and then I'm going to work across the left side of the instep, pick up the gusset stitches along the right side, and then knit across the right side of the heel. And this is going to be my new beginning of round. So here we go. So what I'm going to do is, because I had 32 rows of a heel flap and I slipped every second row, I have 16 of these elongated loops that I can pick up into. So there's one, you'll notice there's sort of one right under where the stitch is sitting on the needle. I'm going to skip that one and I'm going to go into the next one. So I'm just going to put my needle into there and wrap it around as though I were knitting. So there's 1, 2, 3, oops, that one I caught under 2 legs of it, so there. 3. Sorry, I'm kind of wiggling all over. It's hard to do it from a distance, which is what I essentially am doing. My hands are way down at the table level instead of up close to me. So I will continue to pick these up along this edge of the heel flap, and I will come back when I'm ready to close up the gap between the heel flap and the instep. Now picked up and knit 16 stitches along the edge of the heel flap. You can see from this side that you have that nice little chain of stitches that runs along the inside of your sock. and here are the stitches that were picked up. Now here's the tricky part, is how do you then begin working on the instep stitches without having a gap here at the corner. Now there are numerous ways that you can deal with this. I'm going to show you what I usually do, although I have tried many methods. So if you look at this first bar, that's the yarn that's going between this stitch and the last stitch of the heel. I go into that loop of stitch from this direction and I knit it. And then I go through, there's the same loop on this side, and I go into it from this direction, and I knit it. And then I place a stitch marker here. Oops, sorry. And that separates my heel flap and gusset stitches, or my sole stitches, from my instep stitches. So now I'm just going to knit across my instep stitches as normal. In this case it's a stockinette sock. If you had a patterned sock, you would knit across your instep in pattern. So I'm going to work my way across the instep, and then I'll be back to show you how I pick up the stitches on the other side. So I've now made my way almost the whole way across the other side of the instep. So there's my second to last stitch, there's my last stitch. You can see the edge of the gusset, or the edge of the heel flap there. And again, there's that little gap. So first thing I do is I put a stitch marker to mark the divide between the heel flap and the instep. So because of knitting now, you've knit an extra row on this instep compared to the other side. This little line that goes, this yarn stitch that goes across is actually a little bit further down. But I do the same thing. I pick up the stitch that's just bordering that, and I knit into it this way. It almost looks like you're knitting into the back loop of the stitch. And then I find, whoops, sorry, it's hard to do this, hard to see. Then I find the corresponding other leg of the stitch on this side, and I knit into it as though it were a regular way. Now, one thing I found that when you're working on the this side of the heel flap, it's almost like, and maybe there is, an extra slipped stitch. So what I do is count down from the top, count 16 down if that's the number of stitches I'm picking up. 1, 2, 3, 14, 15, 16. So I I skip this one, and I go into this one, and I start with that one. Otherwise, I end up with an extra one up at the top. So maybe that's a better look, not quite as blurry. So you can see there's like an extra one there, and I'm going to miss it. So I'm going to go along the edge of the gusset, pick up and knit 16 stitches. 1, 2. As you can see, again, you have that nice row of, try the light better. There you go. You can see that nice row of chain stitches. So I'm going to pick up along this side of the heel flap, and then I will come back and show you what to do on the next round. So I'm getting to the end of this side of the heel flap, and this is stitch 15, and unlike the other side of the heel flap where I did not knit into the stitch directly below the stitches on the needle, in this case I do, and that's where you end up with that extra stitch. At this end of the heel flap you skip it, and on the other side you skipped it at the beginning. So there's the same number of stitches, it's just how you knit into them. Okay, whoops, there we go. Sorry, it's, as I say, this is actually quite far away from me, so I'm trying to look at it in the camera. Okay, so now these are the remaining stitches on the heel, and so I'm going to knit into those. Okay, just slide this side up. So here's what we end up with. Here's your heel. We've now picked up all along the side of the heel flap, plus 2 stitches in the gap, gone all the way across the instep. Then if we flip our work, knit all the way across the instep, picked up 2 stitches in the gap, and then knit all the way up the heel flap and finish the heel stitches. So as I mentioned before, this back center of the heel is now the beginning of round. And you can see the side of your sock. So I'm going to knit from here down till close to where the heel flap and gusset meet the instep, and then I'll show you what to do there. So I've knit all the way down the heel and heel flap until there are 3 stitches remaining before our marker. So I'm going to knit the next 2 stitches together. Then I'm going to knit the next stitch. And then I'm going to slip my marker and continue working my way across the instep. Now, as you can see, by picking up a couple of stitches in the gap here, and by knitting the next ones together, you have like this little teeny weeny bit of a hole, but it's not really any bigger than the holes that are from the stitches beside it when you stretch out. So it's very hard to get an absolutely airtight, lack of a gap here. And you'll also find after you wash your socks that the yarn will bloom and it will fill it in. But that is much better than what could be the case. So I'm going to knit my way across the instep, and then I'll show you what to do on the other side. So now I've knit my way across the instep. I'm going to slip the stitch marker. I'm going to knit the first stitch of the gusset or heel flap. And then I'm going to work a slip slip knit over the next 2. So again, I slip my first stitch as if to knit, I slip the next stitch as if to purl, and then I knit them together through the back of the loop. And then I'm going to continue knitting along the heel flap and along the heel until I reach my end of round. So again, there is very little of a gap here between the instep and the heel flap and gusset. So what I'm going to do is knit to the end of the round, and then the next row I'm just going to knit without decreasing at all. Just knit one plain round. And then I will work a decrease round again, and then I'll knit another plain round, and I will continue to alternate decrease rounds and plain rounds until I have the same number of stitches on the sole stitches as I do the instep. So in this case I have 32 stitches on my instep, and I will decrease until I have 32 stitches left on my sole stitches. So I'm just going to knit to the end of this round and knit a plain round and then give you an idea of how that looks when that's done. So now I've worked a total of 3 rows on the heel flap and gusset all together. So the first round involved picking up the stitches along the gusset. The second round was working our first set of decreases on either side of the instep, and the third round was a plain knitted round. So again, as you can see, the gap was closed up really well between the heel flap and gusset. It's almost impossible to do it without some distortion because you are picking up a couple of stitches where there didn't used to be any. So you're going to have a little bit of disruption to your knit stitches here, but that's basically unavoidable. And then there's the other side of the instep again. It's closed up the gap really well. So I'm just going to knit a few more rounds so you can see how it looks as it progresses, and then we'll call that done. So I'll be back in a few minutes. So there, I've continued to work a few more rounds of alternating decrease rounds and plain rounds, and as you can see, here's the line of decrease stitches that's beginning to form between the instep and the sole, and eventually you will decrease until you end up with your desired number of stitches. So there's that side. You can see it's doing the same on the other. And then I'll just maybe put this right side up so we maybe get a different perspective on the sock. So there's your cuff, leg, heel, and again this line of decreases that will be forming between the instep and the sole. So I hope this little video has been helpful for you if you're just beginning to knit socks with a heel flap and gusset. So good luck, have fun, happy knitting.